Well, hello again. I've been thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about this week, and because some things have come up, I thought I might take a little sidetrack from what we've been talking about. This mainly the idea of this infinite divine intelligence that you see orchestrating and the symphony of life and choreographing the dance of life, and how we don't do a lot with our thinking mind. And I happened to see Wayne Dyer. I saw a presentation by him, a past presentation, which he talked about the infinite divine intelligence. So that was synchronicity. So you want to pay attention to the things that come up. Well, the other thing that came up was a little piece on a book called "What Happened to You" by Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry. It made me think I might be served to present you with some techniques to figure out what happened to you. A lot of times we ask the question when somebody's misbehaving, what's wrong with you? And that's the one they're countering. It's what happened to you that you're behaving this way? And it's really brilliant. I haven't read the book, but I heartily recommend it. It does have stories, anecdotes, illustration, I guess case histories, as well as tying in with brain functioning. So a number of years ago, I went to a domestic violence workshop, and the theme was these two women had written a book called Ghosts from the Nursery. Ghosts from the Nursery. Now, there's an old psychoanalytic concept of ghosts in the nursery, and they were playing off of that. Ghost in the nursery is when that child is born, the people looking into the crib, the parents and the grandparents and the extended family, all begin to form some impressions. Oh, he looks like Uncle Bob. And he starts shaping the child and conditioning the child. And so they bring the ghosts in their psyche, in the back of their mind, to bear on their perception of the growing child. Now, that's the original psychoanalytic concept. The one that these women were talking about in their book was that when the child is in utero, even in utero, and I've shared with you that experience I had in utero of hunger and feeling, just traumatized by that, feeling helpless. And so that there's traumas, and that's what happened to you really looks at the little mini traumas over time. It's not just major big events. Traumas are really defined as when you feel helpless and have no control over a situation, and that can happen a lot in childhood, as Oprah discussed with her being whipped as a technique for child rearing. So anyway, I see we're getting an unveiling in the back here as the zebra cloth drops. Anyway, so one of the things that you can do in terms of accessing these memories, let me say this again. So brain functioning is very much dependent. So this soul suit that we're in, this corporeal costume, is what we as spiritual beings are inhabiting and using in this planet. And remember that concept comes from Teilhard de Chardin, who once said, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings. We're spirit. We're consciousness having a human experience. So anyway, that being said, so brain functioning, depending on when the little traumas happen. So in utero, they found that kids who had been in utero during in a family where there's a lot of fighting and arguing and so forth, and even though they're in the womb, when they come out, and they did testing of these children at a later time, children who were in environments where there was peace and harmony versus those in chaotic environments, drug abuse and yelling and screaming and so forth, they found that when they were to perform simple tasks and they had the brains monitored so they could see what areas of the brain were lighting up, that those children asked to count backwards, say from 5 to 1 or some simple task, they found that the lights weren't going on in the neocortex area. They weren't in the area of reasoning. They really weren't, the neurons weren't firing like they were in the children where the environment was more harmonious. So indeed, as with serial killers, in some cases, they did studies where they were they were supposed to tap once if the examiner tapped under the desk twice, and what they found was they couldn't wait for the second tap. They almost automatically tapped. So it was almost like no impulse control. And that was because there was no lights going on, no functioning in the neocortex. It was diminished. However, as I was listening to the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, for example, and whatever his impulse control, given his early environment before he was adopted, and Dahmer was one of the worst cases in New York history of a serial killer. And what happened with Dahmer, he was adopted by this childless couple, and they were very ecstatic to have him. And really, I'm sorry, it's not Dahmer. What's the name? That's another. Dahmer was out in the Midwest. So this was in New York. It may come to me anyway. In this case, I was in New York, and I had written a little piece in my book, A Matter of Love, about this case. And I happened to be sitting at a little pie company in New York, and I overheard these people talking, and they were from the area of Long Island where this man had grown up. And I had a suspicion as I listened to their discussion, and I had heard a Discovery episode about that, looking at the brain functioning of serial killers, that what they weren't looking at was something we can do something about ourselves, and that is they weren't looking at what happened to him. And what happened to him, aside from something was wrong with his brain, what happened to him was he was adopted by this excited couple, and when he was 3, his mother got pregnant, surprisingly, and she had a little girl. Suddenly, all her attention shifts onto the little girl, and he gets ignored, basically. And he kind of withdraws in his shell, goes to school, doesn't really socialize, and really is overlooked. And so, sure, that's a typical thing that happens, and how we respond to it makes a difference, our level of sensitivity and so forth. So other people have had sibling rivalry, other people have gone through situations like that. So I remember I was watching the show with my aunt, and I said, they're not looking at the sibling rivalry. When he grows up, who's he kill? 18 women, and I bet they look like, or something similar with women that he kills and his mother and sister. And sure enough, years later, when I was sitting there at the little pie company in New York City, I overheard the conversation. I asked the woman who lived next door to him, I said, did the women did the mother and daughter look somewhat like the women he killed? She said, absolutely. And so, depending on how we respond to these developmental challenges, and depending on what had happened to him prior to their adopting him, figures into the hidden hurts of the past that get reenacted, and the compulsion to repeat these things, like a serial killer is repeating a pattern, and it's never going to satisfy him. He's expressing his anger at the wrong people. It's displaced from the original people who he's probably even repressed his emotions about, because a child can't handle strong emotions, so they tend to repress them, deny them, the classic repression, denial, projection, these defense mechanisms. So when my aunt was listening, she said, oh, I know about sibling rivalry. And she went on to say, and this was at a time when my aunt was having some problems with dementia, but her long-term memory was good. She said, oh, when my baby sister was born, which was my mother, and my aunt was about 5, she said, I would sneak in there and I would pull her hair. And I'd sneak out before my mother could find me in there. And I remember when I was watching a show with my aunt, or I would take her out sometimes for lunch, and she would see somebody with long hair, and she'd say, look at all that hair. And she'd say it with this venomous kind of display. And one time I said to her, why don't you get your hair cut shorter, like my mother had? It'd be more convenient. My mother had passed away by this point. My aunt was older, and I said, why don't you do that? She said, because I don't have the face your mother had. So, whoa, I mean, here she is, close, somewhat demented, some dementia, and the sibling rivalry was right there. I mean, and she was in her 80s at this point. And I thought, whoa, it's explosive. So, one of the things you can do is what I call the shift your focus and energy technique for yourself. So, for example, when I was at the Mayan ruins in Tikal, a woman said to me she had a, a shoulder, an ache in her shoulder on her right side. And this is a little slight deviation, but it's an interesting phenomenon in terms of psychosomatic, how the body, our corporeal costume, our soul suit can store pockets of emotion. And what happened, I said, well, she said, can you do some Reiki? I said, sure. I said, a lot of times you have problems on the right side like that in the back and, those big skeletal muscles. There may be some issue with your father. Oh, that's what the shaman told me, she said. But my father and I are fine. So I said, well, just taking the track, I said, so what male do you have a problem with? Any males in your life you have? Oh, yeah, my boss. So I said, okay, picture your boss, and this is what I call the shift your focus and energy technique. It's step number 2 in the STOP, 4 steps, inner steps for stress that I've talked about and are related to the poster back here with the heart. So I said, now look at your boss, and what would you say to him if you didn't have to worry about any reaction? Fill in the blanks. I hated that blank, and that's because I would love it if blank. I hate how you don't see my gifts, and I'd love it if you see my gift. I hate how you overlook me for the promotions, and I'd love it if you saw what I have going for me, and would see that and recognize it. So I said, okay, now as you feel that, again, let's go with it. I hate how you don't see what I have to offer, and I'd love if you'd see how I offer. I hate how you don't see what I have, my gifts, and I'd love it if you'd see my gifts. Feel it. Are you feeling it? Now look through your father and see who it is in your family growing up. You could say the same thing too and trust what comes. How old are you? So again, look through in this instance. So there it was. See who you could say the same thing to in your family when you're growing up. Trust what comes. She sees her father. I said, what age? I'm 5, and he's reading the newspaper, and she goes in with a drawing from school and this memory, and he does, oh, yeah, okay, and he sort of just blows it off. And so then I have her backing up, see the adult her backing up the little child standing behind her, saying, now, helping her, now on behalf of the child, get your child self to say, picture, Daddy, I hate it that you don't see me and look at my drawings. I'd love it if you paid attention to me and see what I have going. Daddy, I hate how you ignore me sometimes. I love it if you paid attention. So she feels that, and then as she feels that and feels at peace with that, seeing her father, then I have her hug that little child back into her heart and say, I'm here for you, and I'm going to back you up when you need things. So she hugs her back into her heart, comes back to the present, and now if she were to go in to see her boss, she doesn't suddenly, without warning and without knowing it, experience herself as a 5-year-old in the presence of this big father figure who she's intimidated by, rather than going in, having reintegrated that child self into her, those feelings. And now she can stay centered and say, I want to talk to you, rather than going in and say, I want to say something, but I'm furious, I'm afraid, I'm angry, but I'm scared, I'm angry, and she feels paralyzed by the inner conflict over fearing what he'll do and anger at how much her anger is, and she'll lose her job. So instead, she centers herself, comes back, and the anger now has shifted from I hate it that you don't do this, and that's because I'd love it if you did this, to go in to say to him, it upsets me that you're not noticing what I'm contributing here, and I'd really love it if you could see what I'm contributing. And she can say it centered and assertively and not be afraid of that inner conflict interfering with her, trying to get what she'd like to get as an adult. So that look through. So the thing about the right shoulder and the left shoulder, I had another patient at the time, this woman wasn't a patient, but I had a patient at the time whose mother had died, and she was having a somewhat complicated bereavement over her mother. And it came out that as we went into early childhood, by way of this, she had a left shoulder, upper back sort of, it would pain, but it would clench up in the back. And she didn't know why, and she went to the massage therapist, and the therapist would work it all out, and it would be good for a little while, and they would come back. So I said, knowing these hypotheses on psychosomatic type of medicine about the left and the right, male right, female left, I said, okay, now I want you to picture your mother, and if that pain in your shoulder could speak, what would it say to your mother? And I hated it how you, and using the phrase, I hated that, and I'd love it better if. I hated how you hit me with a hairbrush when I was 3 years old. I would love if you disciplined me in a different way. You know, I hated when you were really hard on me. And so all of a sudden there was a whole bunch of stuff repressed about early childhood, because as an adult they were best of friends. They shared a shop together and everything. So that was the thing that was stuck in her musculature. In the muscles, there's the urge to express an impulse, and there's the resistance against expressing an impulse because of the child's fear of what will happen if she were to get angry at the mother when she was little like that. And so, and again, she felt, I can't, I mean, her mother's has passed away, she's loving her, and she's puzzled by this because it's a compromise solution, as Freud talked about, a wish to express something and a fear against it. You know, a desire and a fear is in the conflict in the muscles in the back, as it was for the other woman on the right side. So our bodies are our corporeal costumes, they're our soul suits, and we need to pay attention to these feelings and sensations and be able to take it, whatever it is, and be able to shift it from my tension in my back is telling me I hated that, and see what pops into mind. That's because I love it better if. I hate it that you don't back me up, and I love it if you back me up, say, with a boss or a spouse or something. And that by that shifting back to the love focus, then you can move toward what you'd love to have happen, and you can express it. And you can see what happened to you because so much of it has been repressed. And so while that's a great way to think about people who are behaving badly or yourself, it's what happened to you. Asking, you know, as if the book is asking you, what happened to you? So give that an experiment this week. This is really how to transform, take the energy and shift it back to a love from an anger, fear, sadness, depression. My anger is telling me that I hate this, and that's because I love that better. My fear is telling me I would hate this to happen, that don't pass the test, and I would love to pass the test. And then you keep looking at that gap between what is and what you'd love to have happen and see how you can fill it. And if you can't, you can always say a prayer. Please help me see this situation in new light so I can let go of this pain, find peace and resolution. So I urge you to take a look at this book, What Happened to You? And keep in mind that it's the re-stimulation from the past, the triggers in the present that are bringing up stuff from the past that we don't know we even feel. But by going into and saying, and that's why I use the word hate, because children are really dichotomous. They really have very intense, you know, black and white feelings. So we go in with that. Later you can use this technique without saying the hate piece if you don't want to. My anger is telling me I don't like it that and I'd love it better. My anger is telling me I would love this instead. You can almost shift to that too. But for now, the hate helps to get the defense mechanisms loosened. So when I had that with the patient, not the patient, with the person, that is the woman in Tikal, her defenses about my father and I relationship is great. That gets broken right through to see something in the past that wasn't so great. So this is a way you can sort of do your own little piece of therapy. So when something is bothering you, that's good because that shows you there's a spot in you that needs healing. There's a hidden hurt that needs to be expressed. And so if you're feeling good, that's good. That's what we want. Feeling good should be the norm. And feeling bad, you know, the exception. And so if you're feeling bad, you want to try to use that. What's it telling me? My anger, my fear, you go right to the emotion and just see, fill in the blank. It's telling me I want to rip your face off because you're not listening to me. And that's because I'd love it if you were listening to me. And it always end on what you want and not what you don't want. That way you go between the potholes instead of focusing on the potholes in life and ending up in them. Well, look, have a good week, and we'll be getting back to some of my other journey of my spiritual journey with the Maya next time.